To answer this question, we need to find the missing side length x of this right angle triangle using trigonometry. And as with every trigonometry question, the first step is to label the sides of our triangle. So I'm going to pop over to tab number 3 and put an H in the first box because this long side here is the hypotenuse. The longest side is always the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle of a right angle triangle. So now we can look at the next box and we can say that that should have an O in it because O stands for opposite, and that side is opposite the angle that we'll be using in this question. It's opposite the 29 degrees. Now there's only one side left to fill in, and that's A for adjacent. And A is next to the angle we'll be using in this question, so it's adjacent to it, it's beside it, and that's what adjacent means. So now that we've filled in our side values, we can decide what trigonometry formula we'll use to solve this problem. And the way to do that is to have a look at the sides of your triangle and see which ones have information next to them. If we have a look at the opposite side, we can see that it's got a length of 13. And if we have a look at the adjacent side, we can see that it's got a value of x. So there's information on the opposite and adjacent sides. So they're the sides we'll be using to solve this problem. So therefore the formula we choose has to have both opposite and adjacent in it. And if we have a look up in the top right hand corner of the screen, I've got quick representations of the three trigonometry formulas. Sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse, cos theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse, and tan theta equals opposite over adjacent. And it looks like that's going to be the one we're using in our question today, because our question has opposite and adjacent sides with information next to them, and this formula has opposite and adjacent in it, whereas the other two do not. So our next step is to put the general form of the tan formula into these answer boxes here. So to do that, we'll put in tan and then a bracket theta bracket equals opposite over adjacent. And now we've got our general form of the formula written down, we can start filling it in using the values from the question. The first value we're going to fill in is theta, and we're going to replace it with the angle value in the question. So we're going to pop in a tan and then a bracket and then a 2 for the 20 from the 29, then a 9 and then a closing bracket. So all we've done so far is replace theta with the value 29. Next we want to replace O with the length of that side, which in this case is 13. So I'll put 13 in the next two answer boxes. And then we're going to replace A with the value next to the A side, which is x, which is what we're trying to find out. So now we've got our formula all filled in, we need to rearrange until we can get x on its own, because then that will tell us the value of x. So when you've got x on the bottom of the fraction like we do in this trigonometry question, it's a two-step process to get it on its own. We first need to move the x over to the left-hand side of the equation, and then move the tan 29 over to the right-hand side of the equation. But let's move the x first. Before we do anything else, we should put down what's already on the left-hand side of our equation, which in this case is tan bracket 29 bracket. That's what's already there. Now we're going to move the x over, but to do that we need to use inverse operations, just as if we were doing rearranging equations or other algebra questions where you have to find a value of something by rearranging. At the moment, on the right-hand side of the equation, we've got 13 divided by x, because in a fraction, this line that separates the numerator from the denominator always means divided by. So if we're dividing by x on this side, and we move the x past the equals to the other side, we have to use the inverse operation to divide it by, which is multiplying. So instead of dividing by x here, we'll multiply by x over here. So we can put times x over that side of the equation. Now to fill in these boxes, we just have to look at what's left behind once we've moved the x. All that's going to be left on the right-hand side of the equation is 13. So I'll pop that into those two boxes. Next comes our second rearranging step. At the moment we're multiplying x by tan 29, so we need to move that to the other side of the equation in order to get x on its own, so that the only thing left behind on the left-hand side is x. But before we write down tan 29 on the right-hand side, we need to write down what's already there, and in this case, that's 13. So to use our inverse operations rule, instead of multiplying by tan 29 over this side, we need to divide by tan 29 over the right-hand side. And so because this line in the fraction means divided by, we can simply put tan 29 on the bottom of the fraction, and that means instead of multiplying by tan 29 over here, we're now dividing by tan 29 over this side. So now all we need to do to finish the question is to evaluate our answer, to evaluate this right-hand side of the equation and find out what x equals. So to do that, we can pop over to the calculator, and our first job is to find the tan, or tangent, of 29 degrees. So if we put 29 into the calculator and then hit tan, that will give us an answer, which we need to put in memory. So the memory button is just up here in the top left-hand corner, so if we press that, that will pop the value into memory. Then we can clear everything, and do 13 divided by, let's use the memory recall button to pop that number back into the calculator. So we're going to divide 13 by the tan of 29, which was this result here. And if we hit equals, that completes the question and gives us our final answer. But we're not finished because the question wants us to round to one decimal place. So we need to look at the second decimal place, which in this case is a 5, and that will tell us that we need to round the first decimal place up by 1 because it's 5 or bigger in the second decimal place. So if we do that, our 4 will become a 5, giving us a final answer of 23.5. And if we put that into our answer boxes, that completes the question.